Judy snapped awake, breathing in sharply as her senses quickly came back to her. It was later in the morning, the sun now shining brightly through the window. Her eyes darting around, she realized they had dozed off together. V was still curled up next to her, with her eyes still closed and mouth slightly agape. Judy rolled onto her side and gently placed a hand on V's shoulder to wake her. Her skin was cold and covered with perspiration. V remained motionless. Her eyes widening, Judy jolted up in bed. Studying V carefully, she realized she couldn't tell if V was breathing any longer.
No.
Panic set in as Judy firmly gripped V's shoulder and urgently tried to shake her awake. V? V! V's eyes slowly fluttered open, appearing glassy and dazed. Huh? She muttered. Judy let out an enormous sigh of relief. Oh, fuck. Thank Christ, V. You scared the shit out of me. I thought... Judy stopped herself, not wanting to give voice to the words which had come to mind. V craned her neck as she rolled onto her back. No such luck, she said in a weak voice, a small smile tracing across her lips. Judy realized she was still gripping V's shoulder tightly and finally let go of her as she collapsed onto the bed in relief. Taking a moment to allow her heart to stop racing, she glanced back at V. The smile which had been on her face a moment earlier was gone. Instead, she was now staring up at the ceiling as though she were concentrating on something, her hand clutching the necklace draped over her neck. Though Judy's panic had subsided, a ping of worry still hung in the back of her mind. Are you all right, V? V looked at her out of the corner of her eye, a hint of worry crossing her face. Kinda having a hard time moving and breathing. Judy felt her heart begin to race once more in her chest. She sat up and leaned close to V, running a hand through her hair and delicately tracing her fingers along her scalp. V closed her eyes at the pleasant sensation. I'm here, V. What can I do for you? Judy tried to hide the worry in her expression as V opened her eyes to look at her, but it was clear from the sympathy on her face that she had failed. Nothing. I'm okay, Jude. I just need a few minutes. You took a lot out of me. You get yourself cleaned up. I'll be along in a minute, right as rain. Judy reached down and planted a kiss on her forehead. You promise you're still gonna be here when I get back, she whispered. Yeah, I promise, V replied. Okay. Judy ran her hands through V's hair a final time, trying to assure herself V would still be there when she returned. Sliding off the edge of the bed, she walked to the bathroom, grabbing a pair of shorts and a tank top along the way while making sure to leave the door cracked open just in case. She would never forgive herself if V did call out for help and she simply couldn't hear her. When Judy flicked on the bathroom light, her heart quickly dropped. Her eyes caught sight of the pair of empty Mac stocks laying in the trash can, and then she saw that her makeup case had been opened and its contents disarrayed. When she had awoken earlier to see V standing over her, her smooth contours highlighted by the dim pink lights above her, she had thought at first it had to be a dream. V had looked so alive, attractive. She had been the same woman again that Judy remembered from their first night together at Laguna Bend. Not the woman she knew now who had become a worn shell of her former self. And when V had made love to her, the choice had been easy. Judy had chosen to surrender herself entirely to that dream, to allow the illusion to take hold even if it was only for a fleeting moment. And in her heart, she knew why V had done it. Neither of them wanted to focus on how every experience they shared was very likely to soon be their last. The last time we'll ever make love. But as Judy stared at the empty cartridges strewn in the trash, she could see just how much effort it had taken her, and what it had cost her. Taking a deep breath, Judy turned on the water and stepped into the shower. As the hot water cascaded down her skin, she felt her anxiety slowly beginning to bleed away. V was still here, still fighting, and no doubt the double dose of Max Docs were taking a heavy toll on her as their effects wore off. As the physical weakness from the overdose wore off, she would perk up a bit. It was still their day. Soon after, Judy had stepped out and dried herself off. Throwing on her shorts and top, she quickly combed her hair and brushed her teeth before stepping out. When she walked back into the bedroom, Judy stopped in her tracks. V was sitting on the edge of the bed, leaning over as she pressed hard against the mattress, desperately trying to stand. For a reason she didn't understand, Judy stood silently and watched as V struggled. She could see her arms shaking, her hands pressing tightly into the mattress as she tried to gain the leverage to lift herself. With a grunt, she collapsed back onto the bed, unable to keep herself from falling onto her back. For a moment, V breathed heavily, staring up at the ceiling as she tried to catch her breath. Suddenly, she threw her fists down against the mattress in frustration. She's so weak. Judy realized she had been hoping that V could rise on her own, that her strength hadn't been so heavily depleted. As she looked at V lying on the bed and trying to catch her breath, she knew what her true fear was. Time. Hey! Snapping out of her inaction, Judy rushed over to V's side. I'm here. Let me help you, V. Quickly sitting next to where V lied, Judy cupped a hand under her neck and was about to help her up when V stopped her, pushing her hand away. Don't, Jude. Just let me lay here. Even if I could get up, I can't fucking walk. V's voice was fueled with frustration and self-pity. Judy paused. The defeat in V's voice was heartbreaking. Even worse, Judy knew that what she had said was true. V was simply too frail to be able to get around on her own any longer. Though she immediately felt angry at herself for feeling it, Judy couldn't help the swell of pity which formed in her gut. She remembered when she had first met V and how strong she had been then. When they had gone to the scav den to rescue Evelyn, V had nearly single-handedly fought her way through the shithole those creeps had stashed her in and had carried Evelyn's body out entirely by herself. But now, Judy struggled to see any hint of that strength in the woman who rested next to her. Then I'll be strong for her. Judy resolved herself as she stood up and again reached under V's neck, causing her to flinch. Jude, what the fuck are you doing? Slowly lifting V's head, Judy slid another arm under her knees, wrapping her hands tightly around her legs. Clenching her jaw, Judy steeled her muscles as she lifted her from the bed, causing V to let out a small gasp as she was raised into the air. Making sure she had a good grip, Judy began to carry V away from the bed and towards the bathroom. She was surprised at how light she had become. Glancing down, she saw V staring up at her with reverence, her eyes glimmering with tears. Making her way into the bathroom, Judy knelt down next to the tub and rested V onto the porcelain ledge. When she was certain V could steady herself, she released her grip. Thanks, Jude, V managed. Judy smiled as she straightened herself and stretched her back. Don't mention it, V. Guess you're not as stacked as you once thought you were. V looked up at her and chuckled. You remember that, huh? Judy raised an eyebrow as she smirked. Mm-hmm. Said I couldn't carry your ass. By the way, is there anything you'd like to say to me now?
Touché, Jude.
Judy turned the shower on, keeping her hand under the water until she felt it get warm. Now don't be a gonk, V. Do you need me to help you? V shook her head.
Just hand me the shower head. I got this. It could definitely use another shower after this morning. All dirty and such.
V gave her a sly grin. Judy rolled her eyes as she grabbed hold of the shower head and brought it down to V. You need anything, just give me a holler. Let me know when you're done. A short time later, Judy heard V call out to her from the bathroom. Judy hurried in to help V dry herself off. When she left the bathroom and returned a few moments later with a clean set of clothes, V lowered her head in shame.
This is really fucking embarrassing. You shouldn't have to be doing this, Judy. If you need to leave...
Judy knelt next to V and placed a finger under her chin, slowly lifting her to meet her gaze. Don't you dare talk that way, V. We're way past that. Ain't nothing to be embarrassed about. This is what love is, isn't it? V managed a small smile. As Judy set upon the task of helping to dress her, she noticed V was trembling slightly. Her skin had grown cold once more, the hot water from the shower seeming to have done little to warm her actual body temperature. As she slid V's shirt over her arms, Judy's eyes caught sight of the necklace draped across V's chest. V, seeming to notice where her gaze had gone, looked up at her questioningly.
You want it back?
Judy paused. She realized there was a part of her that did want to wear it. V's sudden embrace of faith, the way she and her abuelo had both spoken of it. Something had resonated within her, even as she struggled to understand exactly what it was. What harm could it do? And yet, another part of her wasn't ready. V's words came to mind.
Just keeping her warm for you till you're ready to get her back.
Judy knew exactly why she wasn't ready to take it back. It would mean V would no longer be keeping it warm for her. That she was gone. No, you keep it. V nodded silently, not taking her eyes off Judy. As Judy finished slipping V's socks on, she knelt down and placed her elbows on V's knees. So, what do you feel up to today? I'm thinking we ought to stay in, considering how you're feeling. Judy didn't see a purpose in pointing out the spent Max stocks lying nearby. They both knew what she had done.
I don't know, Jude. Thinking some sun and waves just might be the cure.
V raised her brow as she grinned. Judy's concerns, however, weren't abated. I'm serious, V. I really don't think it's a good idea for us to go out there today. V leaned closer and gave her a gentle nudge.
Can't say I agree, Jude. Whether I'm laying around in here or out there ain't gonna matter. Sun will do me some good and warm me up. So, come on. Take a girl for a ride?
Judy opened her mouth to protest, but the words died in her throat as she saw the hopeful expression on V's face. Fine, but we're taking some Max stocks with us. Not that you need any more of those right now. I'm gonna have to call Pan later to see if they can get us some more. Wait here. V didn't reply as Judy walked out of the bathroom and down the hall to the den. It was a generous space, though they had not spent much time in it. A pair of couches were placed across from one another with a small table situated in between. There had once been a fireplace against the far wall, though it hadn't been used or maintained in many years and they hadn't bothered to fix it up. The walls were a bland shade of beige, only broken apart by an occasional portrait or mirror. Adjoining the hallway was the kitchen, where V had struggled for the last 2 months to find the right recipe for her noodle fixation. Walking past the couches towards the porch door,
Judy slid on her sandals before leaning over to pick up V's. As she ventured back to the bathroom, she was surprised to see V was trying to stand once more as she struggled to push herself up. Seriously, V? I said I got you. Judy raced towards her and laid a hand on her shoulder. The moment she rested her weight upon V, she felt V weaken and sink back to the edge of the tub. V looked up at her uncertainly. You might be right, Judy. It's a long way to the boat. Maybe we just stay in and you cuddle and pamper me all day. As tempting as the thought was, Judy found herself determined to get V aboard their boat. It was painful to see her doubt herself. It had been what she truly wanted to do, and Judy was resolved to not let her own misgivings get the best of her. Judy tossed the sandals in front of V as she rested her hands on her hips. No backsliding, V. You said you wanted me to take you for a ride, remember? V smiled as she worked her feet into the straps of the sandals. Think you already did this morning. There's my girl. Judy scoffed, though she couldn't keep a smile from her face. You're such a gonk. Come on, let's get a move on. She leaned down, wrapping one arm under V's knees and another around her back. Put your arm around me, V. V took a deep breath as she reached an arm over Judy's neck. Judy steeled herself once more and straightened her knees, raising V off the ledge. Turning around, Judy carried her out of the bathroom and into the den before resting her on the couch. As she stood up, she couldn't stop herself from giving her arms a small flex. Not bad, Jude. Judy went towards the kitchen. We should eat before we go. What do you want? V waved her hand away. Nothing. Not hungry. Judy began to rummage through the cabinets. Come on, V. You gotta eat something. Gonna grab us some of these pre-packaged breakfast burritos we picked up, alright? V closed her eyes and nodded silently as Judy grabbed a pair of the burritos from the cupboard. Do me a favor, will ya? V asked. Can you grab my favorite BD before we go? Sure. Judy smiled to herself as she felt a surge of pride in her craft. V had taken to watching it once or twice a day. As she turned to go back to the den, she quickly spun about and hustled her way towards the bedroom. She had nearly forgotten their bag. Judy threw the burritos onto the bed and then opened the closet near their bed, grabbing the bag from the floor. Just as she was about to leave the bedroom, she stopped again and turned once more, remembering her braindance wreath laying on the dresser. Judy had always intended to scroll another dive for V when they first arrived, though she simply hadn't gotten around to doing it. Now, with time so short, Judy felt a sting of regret. If she had just done it earlier, V could have enjoyed it longer. It didn't have to be edited the same way she had done for the special BD she had made for V. Just the raw experience with a basic filter to edit out her background thoughts and the emotions she didn't want to creep in, and it would have taken her no more than a day at most to do it. As she grabbed the wreath, Judy became aware that her mind was racing as she was moving frantically about the house, almost as if she were in a panic. She was holding a bag in one hand, her BD wreath in another, and had thrown a pair of burritos onto their bed while V waited patiently in the den. Stopping herself, Judy understood why she was so anxious. We don't have much time left. Taking a deep breath, Judy forced herself to calm down, even as she secretly wished for a cigarette. After slowly scanning around the room, she remembered to grab an extra MacStock and a spare blanket just in case. Finally, she took the BD she had scrolled for V out of her nightstand. Throwing everything into the bag, she zipped it up and went back to the den. V was laying exactly as she had when Judy had left, with her head draped back against the sofa and her eyes closed. V?
V stirred awake and lifted her head.
Sorry, just a quick nap. Let's go.
Judy gestured for her to remain where she was, even though there was little need to do so.
Just a sec there, Merc. Let me throw all this in the boat first. Don't want you getting seasick and barfing all over the deck while I'm back here grabbing our shit.
V smirked as she shakily raised her hand, extending her middle finger. Judy left the bungalow and ran down to the dock where their boat was anchored. It was a calm morning, and judging by the thin wisps of clouds above, it was going to be another beautiful day. Reaching the boat, Judy hopped onto the deck and bounced down the stairs into the cabin. Quickly unzipping the bag, she took out the pair of burritos and BD wreath before tossing them onto the blanket. Carrying the contents back up the stairs, she sat them down on the long, upholstered seating which ran along the length of the boat.
Okay, I think that's everything.
Judy ran back along the dock and towards the bungalow, nearly tripping on one of the stairs as she bounded up. Swearing under her breath, she walked back in and approached the sofa where V was waiting.
Okay, I think we're good now. You ready?
V smiled.
Born ready.
Judy prepared herself, even as she pushed away the small hint of doubt in the back of her mind. This wasn't going to be a quick trip between a pair of nearby rooms. She guessed it was nearly 100 yards from the bungalow to the boat, an easy stroll along the beach by herself. But even with V's lightened form, this was going to be a grueling challenge. The last thing she wanted to do was to have to set her down in the sand until she could regain her strength. Just as she was about to reach under her, V joked,
Don't even think about fucking dropping me. Remember, I still got one good blade left.
Judy's eyes drifted down to the deep scar embedded in V's skin. The memory of V thrusting her arm through the propeller blades to save her was fresh in her mind. V had saved her life and risked her own in the process. Reaching under her, she lifted V off the couch. Wouldn't dream of dropping you, V. As V smiled, Judy lifted V up and carried her out the front door. Being careful as she crept down the porch stairs, she began the long trek across the beach. As she moved slowly across the sand, she quickly found herself regretting her choice of footwear. The extra weight she was carrying was causing her to have to shuffle her feet, and she could feel small grains of sand sliding painfully under her toenails as she did so. But as she neared the dock, Judy pressed on until she felt the wood planks under her feet. Finally reaching the boat, Judy adjusted V slightly in her arms and prepared herself for the toughest part. With a surge of effort and a grunt, she stepped across the long space between the dock and the boat, and then quickly stepped down onto the deck. The muscles in her arms and legs were burning as she quickly dropped V onto the nearby seat. V landed a bit roughly, letting out a small gasp of surprise when she did, but managed to keep herself from falling over as she smiled.
Damn, girl. Should have taken you with me on some gigs. Could have used those guns.
Judy had doubled over and was catching her breath, but managed a small laugh.
Of course you could have. What do you think they called me Punching Judy for back in NC anyway?
V raised an eyebrow.
Wait, Punching Judy? How do I not know this story? You need to fess up, Jude. I'll tell you what, V. How about we save that one for tomorrow? We'll give you something to look forward to.
Judy straightened herself and winked at V before she turned back to the dock and began untying the ropes which kept the boat tethered to the dock.
All right. Tomorrow,
V replied. With Judy's attention on the ropes, she didn't take note of the tone in V's voice, or how her expression had faltered when she spoke. When the boat was free, Judy hopped into the captain's chair and started the engine. It rumbled to life quietly and cleanly, a far cry than it had a couple weeks earlier. After the incident with the propeller, Judy had been able to work the sails and get them back to the dock. They had called a local mechanic who had come out to look at the engine the next day. The transmission had gotten stuck, he said, and if they had simply cut the fuel line, it would have stalled the engine without incident. V had shrugged it off and asked him how much it would take to get it fixed. When the mechanic had protested about the amount of work, V had only transferred a generous sum of eddies to his account, and he had been fast to work, quickly changing the transmission and replacing the propeller blades. He had been so grateful that he had even topped off the gas tank for them. Judy turned the wheel and accelerated, taking off towards the direction of the reef. She always loved this part of their travels, the feeling of setting off for the horizon, the sensation of the wind rushing through her hair as the ocean spray struck her face made her feel free, almost as though she were part of the ocean itself. With a wide grin, Judy stood and gunned the engine as fast as it could go. Before long, they had arrived at their spot. Judy throttled back and killed the engine, allowing the boat to coast to a gentle stop. She took a moment to scan the horizon. The ocean was remarkably calm this morning, and with the sun shining brightly, the water had taken on a vibrant shade of blue. Noticing how clear the water was, Judy's anticipation rose. It was going to be a great day for diving. Judy stood and turned to face V. She had wrapped the blanket tightly around herself as they had cruised across the water, but she was now slowly unbundling herself.
Sun feels so fucking good,
V noted as she lifted her face and closed her eyes, allowing the sunlight to warm her skin. Judy nodded.
Gonna go below and get changed. Your breakfast is right there.
Judy pointed to the burrito laying next to her. Venturing down the stairs into the cabin, Judy walked around the small bed which took up most of the space and slid open a cabinet, revealing a pair of wetsuits.
I'll never see her in one again.
Shaking the thought from her head, she began to slide out of her clothes, tossing them onto the bed before stepping into the suit. After zipping it closed, she ventured back up to the deck. V was slowly pulling the seal off the burrito wrapper, letting out a whistle of steam as the package began to immediately heat its contents. As a wisp of smoke hit her nose, Judy saw a look of disgust cross V's face as she looked up at her with pleading eyes.
Come on, V. Even if you're not hungry, you still gotta eat.
V sighed in frustration.
Makes my stomach churn just thinking about it.
V, stop making me ask you already. Have a few bites. Do it for me, all right? V reluctantly lifted the burrito to her mouth and took a small bite, her disgust growing as she slowly chewed. Judy sat down next to her and opened her own. Satisfied that V was continuing to nibble away at hers and forcing down what she was chewing, she took a large bite of her own.
So, I had an idea for today,
Judy began as she swallowed down a bite.
Was thinking I could sync us up again when I go under. Only this time I'll filter everything out, so it's just focused on the AV feed. Really don't want to overwhelm your nervous system right now with all the rest of the sensory inputs, but this will still let us hear each other and see each other's feeds. That way you can still kinda be there.
V tossed the mostly uneaten burrito next to her.
You don't need to do all that, Jude. I'll be down there with you in here.
V rested her hand on her heart. Judy smiled. She had noticed over the last few days that V had become uncharacteristically sentimental.
Or was she just saying fewer of the things which didn't matter?
Are you trying to make me feel all mushy right now? Judy asked playfully, though a part of her immediately wished she hadn't said it so dismissively. Was it so wrong to feel this way, especially now when things were nearing the end? Almost as though V had read her mind, she continued.
Actually, guilty as charged. Want you to know how much I love you, Jude. You don't need to fuss over little old me. Go put your mask on and get your ass back in that water, Alvarez.
V gestured her head towards the ocean. Judy's smile faltered. V's words should have made her laugh or roll her eyes. Instead, seeing the earnestness in her eyes and how genuine she spoke, it made her sad instead. V, Judy knelt down so she was level with V. I love you too, and you know there's no way I'm not going to fuss over you. So just do me one little favor. Eat your damn breakfast. V smiled. Tell you what, you grab my BD for me, and maybe I'll have a bite or two. What do you say? Deal. Giving V a gentle nudge, Judy stood and went back to the cabin, returning a moment later with her mask and wreath along with the chip which held V's BD. Judy sat next to V and began to work on the wreath, adjusting its settings to make sure she was only sending the audio and video feeds. She wished they could share the experience the same way they had at Laguna Bend so many months ago, and suddenly Judy realized it was likely that V would never truly dive with her again. She shifted slightly so her face was hidden from V's view. She didn't want V to see the sadness on her face. Making the final adjustments, she slid the receiver chip out of the wreath and attached it to the inside of her helmet. Taking a deep breath to clear her thoughts, she stood. All right, think we're all set here. Judy slid the wreath over V's head, just as she had done the first time they had met in the basement of Lizzie's bar. She pulled the straps to make sure the wreath was snug on and adjusted for a good fit. Feel good? Judy asked. Preem, V said with a smile. Good. You want to watch your BD now? Judy offered her the chip. V took it gingerly and, rather than inserting it into the wreath on her head, instead slid it into her pocket. No, just like having it with me is all. Judy nodded as she brushed a hair away from V's face. Okay, gonna take a dip now and see if I can find us a pair of starfish for the bungalow. Thinking it would really tie the place together, you know? Sounds Nova, Jude. Get me a big one though if you can. Gotta make up for my small size somehow. With a smile, Judy stepped to the ledge. You got it, V. I'll do a quick check when I hit the water to make sure we're synced. Judy leapt off the edge of the boat and crashed into the ocean. As she began to sink, she motioned her arms about her, allowing the coolness of the water to wrap itself around her body. This was where she felt at home. In the water, there were no boundaries or deceptions, and no direction which was off limits. True freedom. Raising her hand to the side of her helmet, she switched on the small transmitter which was attached. A moment later, she could hear the sound of V breathing and could see her point of view. V's eyes were focused on the horizon in front of her. V, can you hear me? V's voice came through clearly. I hear and see you, Jude, loud and clear. Me? Same. So, pick a direction. Judy wished they could have synced their thoughts together as well. Perhaps tomorrow, when she felt better, they could go out and try again. She slowly panned her head back and forth, allowing V to see her surroundings. There, go that way, V had called out when Judy's gaze had shifted towards the ocean floor. Moving her body through the water, she began to swim down in the direction V wanted. As she approached the bottom, her eyes caught sight of a large ferry which was encrusted with coral. Several schools of fish were lazily swimming about, taking no notice of her as she approached. I'm just another fish in the water here. When Judy reached the ferry, she stopped herself and raised her body up so she was vertical. A dark shape in the distance caught her eye. What's that? Judy squinted. It was barely visible and far in the distance, but was clearly moving against the flat blue of the ocean which surrounded it. As Judy continued to watch, the shape slowly began to take on greater definition. Her eyes widened when she realized what it was. Holy shit! I think that's a whale, V. Slowly, the large creature drifted closer,
as its fins gently moved back and forth in the water. Judy's mouth was wide open as it drifted overhead, briefly blocking out the sun above her. She had no idea what species of whale it was, being that there were so few of them left. But she knew that whatever type it was beautiful, something which belonged. V's voice came in weakly over the speaker. "Whoa. Yeah," Judy whispered as she continued to watch the whale slowly recede back into the depths, eventually disappearing from her view. Taking a few deep breaths, Judy blinked and shifted her attention back to the ocean floor. Across the seabed were rocks, coral, pockets of seaweed, and the occasional patch of open sand. Spotting an open patch not far off, Judy set off towards it. As she approached, her eyes caught sight of several familiar shapes spread across the sand. Making sure not to move too quickly to kick up sand, she reached down and lifted one off the surface. The skeleton of the starfish was beautiful, and as Judy glanced around, she could see more of them all around her. Setting it down, she began to search for the perfect one. Judy had just caught sight of one which appeared to be particularly large when she noticed V's feed was beginning to go dark before both the video and audio cut out. "V?" Judy called out. There was no response.
"She's exhausted."
Judy decided to let V rest and drifted forward, lifting a large starfish off the seabed as a cloud of sand and salt rose off it. Studying it carefully, she smiled. Now this was something which screamed V. Checking her oxygen gauge and satisfied that she still had plenty of air remaining for another dive, Judy lifted her head and spotted the silhouette of the boat not far away. She began to kick her legs and swam towards it. Reaching the surface, Judy swam a few laps towards the boat and grabbed onto the ledge, setting the starfish aside as she pulled herself onto the deck. Pulling off her mask, she casually tossed it aside and took a moment to take in her surroundings before picking up the starfish and turning to V. She was laying slumped against the seat and was perfectly still with her eyes closed and her mouth slightly parted. The wreath had shifted awkwardly over her forehead. "V, wake up." Slowly, V's eyes opened, her gaze appearing distant before locking onto Judy's eyes. A smile spread across her lips. "Hey." V's voice was almost a whisper. "You bring me something?" Judy laughed as she stepped over the railing. "You bet your ass I did. Check out this fella." She held up the starfish for V to see. V's eyes lit up as she looked across its surface. "It's great, Jude. Reminds me of something." V's fingers grazed across the surface of her navel, tracing along the lines of the starfish which was imprinted there. Judy beamed, closing her eyes as she took in a deep breath of the ocean air. She couldn't have asked for a better day, and spending it with V, as weak as she had become, only made things better. Opening her eyes, she glanced down at V. An odd expression had come upon her face which Judy couldn't place. She almost seemed to be staring past her, as though she were lost in thought. "V?" V's eyes slowly focused on her. "Where's yours?" "What do you mean?" Shifting slightly as she adjusted the wreath on her head, V continued, her voice sounding clearer now. "We should match, Jude, just like our ink. Appreciate you grabbing me one, but you need to go back down there and find one for yourself." Judy rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on, V. Is it really that big of a deal? It's just a starfish. It's not like we can't share." V's eyes widened slightly. "It's not just a starfish, Judy. Don't care how long it takes to find the right one. It's important to me."
Judy sighed as she picked the mask up off the deck and slid it back over her head. She wasn't sure why V was so insistent on having her go back in search of another. Fine. You want to sync up again?
Wouldn't miss a moment, Judy.
Judy grabbed her mask off the floor. All right, I'll get the feed kicked over to you. Better stay awake this time. V relaxed back into the seat as her eyes closed and a small smile spread across her face.
No promises.
Judy set the starfish down next to V. Uh-huh. I'll see if I can find another one like this, but honestly, V, most of them really don't compare all that much. It might take me a while. V's smile widened.
You'll find another one, Judy. I have faith in you.
Judy turned and stepped over the railing. She paused for a moment to slide the mask over her face before she dove back into the water. Turning on the transmitter again, she began to work her way through the water. Before long, she caught sight of the same patch of sand she had found the last starfish at. As she reached the bottom, her eyes began to scan around. She spotted several starfish of varying shapes and sizes, though none of them were the same size as the one she had found for V. For several minutes, she walked across the ocean floor, occasionally stopping to admire the view around her. Before long, V's feed began to fade again and went dark once more. Judy shook her head, deciding it would be best to allow V to rest and to give her another Maxstock when she returned. It had been several hours since she had taken the double dose, and she could probably handle another one now to help make the withdrawal less harsh. Turning her head, her eyes brightened when she caught sight of an enormous starfish resting in a patch of nearby kelp. Quickly brushing aside the thin leaves which lazily drifted back and forth in the water, she lifted it up to inspect it. Even though she didn't have the other one to compare to, she was certain the one she held now had to be close in size. Even more interesting though, there was an intricate pattern of black speckles which dotted across its surface. It gave it a distinct flair, similar to the other one, and yet different. Smiling to herself, Judy clutched it in her grip and ascended once more to the surface. Breaking above the water, she swam her way to the boat and pulled herself onto the deck. Hey V, wait till you see what I found. Judy pulled off her mask again and tossed it aside. She took a moment to run a hand through her hair, shaking her head as she did and enjoying the feeling of warmth on her face from the sun. V? Judy turned to V. V was still laying on the seat with her eyes shut and mouth open, just as she had been earlier. Seeing the BD wreath laying on the ground next to her, Judy shook her head. It must have slipped off of her as she drifted back to sleep. A glimmer of light from V's hand, which was draped over the edge of the seat, caught Judy's eye. Squinting, she realized what it was. Her necklace. The chain of the necklace was wrapped around V's fingers, the metal crucifix dangling lazily from her hand. Judy's eyes moved back to V's face.
No.
V, come on. I want to show you this. It's huge, just like you wanted. There was no answer, as V remained motionless.
No.
Judy shook her head as she climbed over the railing and walked towards V. V, I know you're tired, but you had me go all the way back down there for this, so wake the fuck up. The irritation in her voice was rising. Her eyes drifted back down to the necklace, the small crucifix gently waving back and forth in the wind.
No.
Judy stared at V. She began to feel her heart pounding in her chest as a cold sweat broke out upon her skin. Slowly reaching down, she rested her hand on top of V's. Her skin was like ice despite the sun, and there was no acknowledgement from V. Gripping her hand tighter, she felt for a pulse. There was nothing. V. Judy's voice broke as she spoke. Quickly lifting her head, Judy turned her gaze away and stared towards the horizon. A lump quickly grew in her throat, and her eyes began to sting as tears welled in her eyes. Breathing deeply, she tried to force herself to stay calm.
Ooh, okay. I'm okay. I'm okay,
Judy whispered.
You're just gone.
The words caught in her throat as a sob nearly escaped her. Clenching her fists tightly, she struggled to keep her eyes locked in front of her and not let them drift over to V's lifeless body. She was breathing rapidly now, her heart pounding harder in her chest as her body struggled for release. One of her hands had found its way to her mouth as she relentlessly chewed on her nails. Judy squeezed her eyes shut as she began to rock back and forth faster and faster until she clasped her hands together as tightly as she could in front of her, her fingers locking together tightly. Her nails dug into the skin of her palms as she reached the breaking point. In an instant, she was overwhelmed.
No!
Judy threw her face to the sky and screamed at the top of her lungs as the first tears spilled down her cheeks. Sobbing, she turned and knelt next to V, wrapping her in her arms.
No! God damn you, V! You fucking promised me! You promised me you'd fight!
Judy screamed as loudly as she could in V's face, hoping that her rage would somehow wake her. When no response came, her anger quickly dissolved away as she began to wail uncontrollably. Judy cradled V's head to her breast as she began to rock back and forth once more, her face twisted in agony as hot tears continued to spill down her cheeks. V. Judy tried to speak, but couldn't. Her throat was constricted, her breath coming in ragged gasps. V. No. Oh, God, no, please, no. Please don't leave me. As Judy desperately tried to catch her breath, her eyes drifted to the necklace in V's hand. As she rocked her in her arms, Judy's mind suddenly snapped back to the way V had sounded when she had told her to wait until tomorrow to hear the story behind her nickname, how she had asked Judy to grab her BD before they left, what her final words to her had been. I have faith in you. She knew she was going to die. Reaching down, she took hold of the crucifix and slowly pulled it away from V's fingers. Staring at it for a moment, she looked back down at V. I'm sorry, V. I'm not angry. I know you fought as hard as you fucking could. Judy's voice broke again as another wave of grief struck her, squinting her eyes tightly as more tears spilled. She buried her face in V's hair. I'll always love you, V, she managed in a strained whisper. As she gently rocked V back and forth, her eyes caught sight of the small lump in her pocket where V had put her BD recording. Forcing down the lump in her throat, she began to softly hum their song in V's ear. As time slowly passed, Judy began to collect herself even as she kept her arms wrapped around V, refusing to let go of her. She looked up to stare at the horizon. Her thoughts were racing as a jumbled mix of memories sprung into her mind without rhyme or reason, each one lingering for barely more than a moment before it was replaced with the next. She remembered sitting on a motel bed next to V as they ate their favorite pizza, laughing about what to name their newly purchased boat. The fun time they had enjoyed when Pan Am had joined them for a night of drinks at some high-end bar in Phoenix. The vulnerability in V's eyes when she had confessed the horrible trauma she had endured as a child and why she had left her former name behind. The warmth of V's hand when she had grazed her fingers across her face for the first time at Laguna Bend, and the excitement she had felt in the heat of that moment. The smile she had worn on her face when she had revealed to her the words she had added to her tattoo. Judy looked down. V's shirt was rolled up slightly, and she could make out a small part of her tattoo. She reached down and pulled the shirt up higher, revealing the inscriptions which rested above it. I promise. Judy nodded as she sniffled. You kept your promise, V. As Judy stared at the words on her skin, she remembered what V had made her promise when they had first had their hopes crushed in Phoenix. That she would live. Not just survive, but to truly live and to carry on with the same passion and fight as she always had. Closing her eyes tightly, she knew what she needed to do. Draping the necklace over her head, she clutched the crucifix tightly in her hand as she closed her eyes and took a deep breath and whispered, her voice wavering. V, I don't know if you can hear me, but if you can, I'll keep my promise just like you did. As hard as it'll fucking be, I'll let you go. Judy stood, being careful to gently lower V's head onto the seat before she hooked her arms under her and lifted her up. Feeling more tears beginning to well in her eyes, she carried her towards the deck. Another sob escaped her as she knelt, gently resting V's body onto the edge. Her heart was pounding again as more tears began to escape from her eyes. As delicately as she could, Judy draped one of V's legs over the edge, her foot entering the water, then the other. She remembered with a pang of sadness how V had always liked to sit with her feet in the water. Breathing rapidly as she bordered on losing control of herself once more, she lifted V slightly by her arms and slid forward, laying herself down as V's legs sunk further into the water up to her waist. Judy was now laying on the deck. Her hands, which were hooked under V's arms, were the only thing keeping V from sliding into the water. V's head was tilted back, her closed eyes facing the sky above. As Judy began to cry once more, she pressed her forehead against the cold surface of V's cheek. Fuck! I can't do this! Long minutes passed as Judy remained motionless, crying as she kept her face pressed against V's. Finally, she sniffed as she pulled her face away and looked down at V. I'll keep my promise, and I'll always love you, V. I'll never fucking forget you. Judy spoke in a broken whisper as she placed a final kiss on V's lips. Goodbye, V. With a small whimper, Judy gradually released her hold on V and watched as her body slowly slid into the ocean. With wide eyes which burned, Judy watched as V slowly sank beneath the waves, her pink hair waving gently with the current until she eventually vanished from view. With a final sob, Judy rolled onto her side and curled herself into a ball. Gripping her knees tightly, she stayed that way as she cried to herself for hours. The boat continued to slowly rock up and down as the ocean waves, which V would forever be a part of, gently comforted her.